Hello, everyone, and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where apparently I forgot. Um, I thought we were still in the middle of some breaking changes to the build because we were changing the way that we did, some of the entity storage stuff in a pretty dramatic way. Not a super hard change to make, but it was fairly substantial, and I thought we had only gotten partway through it. Which I'm sure we hadn't, but I thought we left it not compiling. To my surprise, when I tried to compile it, compiled. Oh, there, good. Okay, it didn't. What was I thinking? Is that's what I was like, it shouldn't compile. Like, what happened? That was my. It's weird. I suppose after a week or two, I only see this code base in little points, so I kind of expect my memory to be bad. But usually, it ends up being fairly good about what we did. And I was kind of surprised. I was like, gosh, that's weird. I remember it not compiling. So, all right, I'm glad my memory's better than I thought it was. So, yeah, what we were doing last time is just removing a bunch of old things from the code base that we would like to do differently now. And we have a little bit of a uphill climb to remove some of these things. Because when you leave a code base for a little while working in a particular way, things build up dependencies on the way it's working. It's one of the reasons people oftentimes have really bad code bases, is because they never take the time to then go fix those incorrect initial assumptions. They just keep piling on top of them forever. I mean, this is how you get most major code bases. If you open something like LLVM, it's just pile after pile of bad decision that nobody ever goes back and fixes, right? So it just becomes this huge sprawling code base where suddenly it takes like 5 million lines of code to do something that should have taken 10,000 lines of code, right? And you're many orders of magnitude off of where you should be. So there's a reason that happens, and that's because it's harder. It's harder to go back in and do it. So we will have a little bit of an uphill battle here because we've got to kind of rethink a few things. And change how we do things, but it's always worth doing, because if you take the time to improve these things, that's how the code base actually improves, and you get better performance and better maintainability in the long run if you can do it. If you can't, then you can't. So hard to say, but if you can do it, that's what you would like. So taking a look here, we have like this familiar. I don't actually remember what we were doing here in terms of various things we created. I think, if I remember correctly, we had this brain familiar was actually like just the floaty guys that were just in there for testing. I don't really remember us doing anything else with them. Floaty thing for now, I don't think we have anybody doing, so I don't know that anyone actually makes a floaty thing for now. And I'm not actually sure how to get, you'll have to forgive me, I don't use this editor anymore, as I've said before, so I forget like how I do some things with it, but yeah, so you can see here, like, there's really nobody uses some of these, so we should be able to delete, say, the Monstar and the floaty thing for now, because I don't think anyone actually uses the Monstar either. But they use the other two, like the familiar, the snake, and of course the hero, so I should say 3. Those are all being used, but the other ones aren't. So you can kind of see if we do, like, if we look for any of the other ones, they're actually getting used somewhere. Now, this is a little weird. Maybe I am wrong about the way the search works. Because it looks like when the brain gets set, that it wasn't actually using. Okay, so it looks like it's actually this. It uses just the sort of back half, which makes sense. It uses a macro to look that up. So let me actually try brain Monstar just to make sure that we're not actually using this somewhere. Because here's the actually add Monstar code that would create one, and I guess you can kind of see here that. It's if zeroed out, and we never use it. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these for now, because again, they were just kind of old code that we had used at some point, and so we don't need to maintain it through this change, because if we're ever going to add a Monstar, we're going to add it differently, right? We're going to do it differently. than we were doing it, and I'll check for the brain floaty thing. But since it doesn't even have an actual struct associated with it, I'm pretty sure that was just nonsense anyway. So let me go ahead and remove those and make sure that we only have things in here that are actually being used at the moment. We'll leave the familiar and port it. I'll delete the Monstar. And so we're just looking at this case here. Now, after this case as well, I'm not sure what else we've got. So we got a couple sim space things in here we got to remove. Boost is not a real thing. We don't actually use that anymore. This we will eventually. It's just we won't probably do it exactly this way. So I think we probably want to just get rid of this as well, because again, it's not really going to be something that we're going to do the same way. So let's take a look at that boost code as well. The boost data in here, we don't really need. Like I said, we probably will use it someday, but probably just not immediately. So we'll want to do it slightly differently and in the new way. So we'll rewrite that one. We'll rewrite this code, and then this code we will keep. And then all this code that uses traversable references we'll also keep. Well, this is kind of interesting. What is the actual complaint here? Get entity ID not found. So in terms of following, this is one place we will actually need to do a little extra work, because we don't really want to, if we can avoid it, we would rather never have an actual lookup directly by ID. So what we would rather do is actually have it so that the camera gets moved with the entity in question. There's two ways we can look at this, and, you know, we don't really have to be that diligent about it, because the camera really only follows one entity. So we could just always track where that particular entity is stored and make sure that we always unpack it, right? But this will be an interesting one, because as you can kind of see, everything else is pretty straightforward. There's no real other place where we're doing things that require lookups by ID. And that's the, only place. You know what I mean? So I guess the way I would say it is, I think we want to try and handle that one place a little differently, because otherwise we're just maintaining an entity ID lookup for no reason. And I don't think we want to do that. It doesn't make sense to do that, right? So let's go ahead and port the rest of the code, and then we'll look at that specifically as a separate thing that we can treat, that we can look up in a more specific way. So here's our brain familiar, and you can see that sort of what it's doing is just looking up in a particular direction to see if it can go to a subsequent square. Now, my understanding was that we sort of already had this situation. In Execute Brain Hero, we sort of had a thing where we had to do exactly this, right? So what we were looking at is when you have to go in a particular direction, you had a thing where you had to look to see if you could move, And I thought we had already looked at that. So I just want to take a look at what we already did here to the extent that we did something. So you can see it here, right? We've got a transactional occupy call with a tile index, and you can see us trying to make that happen. So the idea here was that we were going to implement a lookup to see if there were any entities that were already on that square, and if there weren't, then you could stand there, right? So this single tile delta from and then transactional occupy are just our way of doing that movement. And I think that's basically it. It's really just, yeah, it doesn't seem particularly complicated at all. So the single tile delta from function, you can also see it just produces, you could give it an arbitrary vector, and it's like, well, if you were to go along that arbitrary vector, given that we only allow you to move on the cardinal directions, you can hop, what would be the tile motion that would most closely approximate that, right? Like that particular vector. And so that's really all we're talking about here. So if we go back to the actual place where we're trying to have the familiar work, I think that's basically the same. So here we would, this didn't do any path finding. This code didn't do anything. All it did was try to go in a particular direction. And I guess I'm not sure what this first part is meant to do. Let me move it over to the other window so my head's not behind it. So you can see here it says, well, let's look at where we are and try to figure out where that is. And then it just goes, okay, is the place that we're on, is that acceptable for me to be on? It looks like, right? It's like, is the closest traversable the one that I'm on? If it isn't, then I guess the blocked equals false. I'm not sure why it would necessarily... This is kind of a misnomer. It's not really blocked. It's just I'm done moving. So this is like should move is really, like you could think of this probably should be. Right? So if we said like should move, and here we're like, we should move, it's true. We see if the traversable is equal to where I am, and it says should move. No. We look here and we say transactional occupy to the one we're on, and then we say, should move no. And the reason for this is just to say this means if I... Well, actually, I'm not sure, because if I was able to transactionally occupy... I guess this sense is slightly wrong. I mean, it's really more like shouldn't move or something like that, right? You know what I mean? But it's not really about being blocked because you don't really know whether you're blocked here or not, right? So if we can't get the closest traversable at all, then I guess we don't do this. But again, part of the cleanness here is we don't really need to do this anymore because we know we're on the tile index we're on, right? So we know we don't need to get closest traversable. Like we kind of know that where we are, right? Like where we are is head tile index. That's just where we are, right? And so if we look at the entity in here where we've got that tile index, you can see this is where we believe ourselves to be in the global world positioning, right? And then this P value and the DP value, those are just values that are more transitory, right? Those are ones that eventually we probably want to just base off of the tile. So these are relative to the tile index, probably is what we would want to do. Because then that just works. And we could even at that point, if we wanted to, get rid of the sim region and have a party, right? Which may be a much better idea. Anyway. Because if you look at that, we've now managed to engineer ourselves into a place where we really don't need it. If you look at this, the brain hashing is the only thing that we actually... that's the only thing we actually need, and we could just keep that on unpack. So whenever we unpack entities, we update this. The rest of the stuff we don't need. We wouldn't need an actual sim region. You would just unpack. All you would do is call unpack and then compute directly. So it's a little bit false because the sim region would contain the spatial partition, which we said we want. So we wouldn't totally get rid of it, but, you know, again, you could kind of see how these two things are converging as we sort of see what we actually need and can kind of consolidate down. All right, so anyway, back to our story. So I guess I also don't know what dabs tile z is doing anymore, because I don't think that's probably doing anything. Is that just dead? Yeah, it is. So back to our story, we would know at this point that we can just use the tile index as the location, and we can look to see if we want to try and go somewhere with the familiar. Again, this isn't actually code we care about in the abstract. It's just we want to make sure that we can do it. So it's just test code. We don't need the closest traversable part. Here, this again probably is irrelevant because this is just always true. So we don't care about this anymore. So we're just down to this, which is basically a way of saying we need a way to look and see if we're at the edge of a tile. It's really all this is, right? All this is we're saying we're at a location, and now we're going to have like a delta off of that location or something like this. And we need to figure out whether we are... whether we need to try to take the next square, like whether we're at the point where we should switch over to the next square. So I think what we want is something more like this, where we do a get closest entity with brain probably right off the bat, right? Like we just want to say, who are we chasing? And closest entity will give us back the entity in question, and I assume that it's just 0 if there's nothing, which, yeah, it is, right? So we could probably get rid of the should move, and we could probably change this directly to something where we just want to know when we do that check here, what's the closest entity? And then what we want to do is figure out if there's any difference between where that entity is in tile space and where we are in tile space, right? And so we just want to say, we just kind of have an open question here too about when the transactional occupy occurs. Because there's two ways we could do this. One way to do this is the transactional occupy occurs in the brain code. The other way to do it is the transactional occupy actually occurs in the like movement code. And I can't say I know which one of those you want to do. So I don't know, but we'll just kind of do something here, and we'll cross this bridge when we're done porting this initial part of the code. So when we grab this entity out, then we've got to check the closest entity thing, and I guess we previously had a check for how far away you are, but I guess we're not going to do that anymore. So then what we want to do is we want to say, well, we know we have to move in a particular direction to figure out where this, to figure out like which way we should go. And so what we want to do is say, well, the closest entity's tile index and our tile index, the delta is just the difference between those. So that's the direction we want to go. And then we can probably use the single tile delta from call to figure out which one of these we're actually going to do. So we can say, like, here's the tile delta, and then here's the single delta. Where we just reconstruct that. So we say, okay, we're going to move in a direction. It's whichever one is larger, with tie going to y, I guess. Looking at this code. And so then you say, well, the single delta is this. So then what I want to do is I want to transactionally occupy that square. If I can. Right. And the reason I say that this isn't quite it yet is because we are trying to say that you're going to float in a particular direction. And to be honest, I didn't quite see that part. Did I delete that part somewhere? Like, where is the part where it actually set a velocity on this thing? Did anyone see? Because I don't see, it doesn't do that. Like, it never... It doesn't seem to ever set. Yeah, I don't get it. Maybe we deleted that part of the code earlier, but where's the part where it actually says, like, get closer to this thing, right? And I don't quite see it. So I'm not sure what the deal is there, because there should be a thing where we're trying to float it towards that target, which maybe happens here. Let's see. Nope. Here. Okay. So this is where it actually happens. So really all we want to do is there a way that we get out of the floating mode? There really isn't. So, it just kind of does this the whole time. So hopefully, I don't know, I'm probably not explaining this very well, and I apologize, only because I'm just trying to look through like what we actually did here. But what I'm trying to say is we have code here that's supposed to decide what this entity is doing. It's kind of like where the AI, for lack of a better term, is happening. Game AI, not deep learning or something, right? And in here, it decides what square it wants to go towards, but then the animation code over here is what actually moves it. So that target P wasn't doing anything. It was the transactional occupy that actually did something. Because the transactional occupy changed these two so that it would animate between the two of them. That's what was actually happening. So what I was trying to say was, well, we don't want to move more than 1 square away from where we are currently. But that's probably fine, because probably all we do is we just say, well, we're going to try and transactionally occupy the square that's like 1 away from our head P's location or whatever, right? So that's where we're going to try and go. And we'll see if we can get there, right? So, you know, mover ref, desired ref is tile index target square. So we're just trying to see if we can move 1 square in that direction, and that, in theory, would work. There's reasons why this isn't great. It'll lead to some popping artifacts and stuff like that. It's a little clunky. And so we're going to want to streamline this. Probably the first thing we do after we get this up and running again is we streamline this movement stuff to be much clearer about what's going on. Why can't I change this to a V2? Does anyone know? Anyone? Apparently V2S isn't defined here somehow. Oh, because this is in the Ray math. Great. Why did it load up the Ray math library? Probably should not even have that in the set of things that can plausibly happen. All right. So, yeah. So I don't know why was head P. That was wrong. And at the moment, we don't actually care if it succeeds or fails. Doesn't matter. So that's the simpler version of the ported code, right? Now, looking at the update animation stuff, you can kind of see what's going on here. This is... The p-values are used for rendering are based around the simulation region that we unpacked to. And you can kind of see there's now a lot of stuff we can start to consider here that we could do differently than we were doing it before, but, you know, only some of it probably makes sense to actually do. But the point is, this get sim space traversal stuff doesn't actually matter anymore. We just need to do a very simple, like, you know, tile space to sim region mapping, where we're going to say, hey, the entity's tile index needs to be mapped into the sim region as a v3, and here tile space sim region. Same deal. To figure out where we're going from and to, will look something like that. The rest of this then will just work because, you know, it just needs 2 3-dimensional positions in basically the space of the camera to do the hop between. It's not complicated. And then the same thing happens down here. It's just going to do a simpler movement lerp, right? Now, if we wanted to be lazy about this, which at the moment we kind of do, I'm just going to go ahead and say that we're just going to leave that up there, and then we delete the version of the floating call, and they're both the same. So we really just need something that does that spatial mapping, which is pretty easy to do, so we should do it. And then what else we got here, though? Yeah. So this, the move queue stuff, again, should probably now not be V2s. It should just be V2Ss, right? Because it's always going to move along square boundaries. So it probably should just be that, and then you can just look up the tiles directly and call it a day. This doesn't do transactional occupies, and I think that's intentional because the flags... We were eventually going to just check the flags to see if ephemeral was set and not do it, whereas ephemeral wasn't set. Then we actually fail if you don't do the transactional occupy. But I'm pretty sure as a result, the tile index stuff could just be set directly here. Now, I'm not sure how this was working before, but I'm assuming it was just using the lerp. So, yeah, like literally this thing just needs to do this standard thing that we were doing before. Right. And so we're going to want to use a transactional occupier or other things like that in the future to check these things, but for the most part, I think we're okay. Once again, it's got the error value wrong there somehow. Don't know how that managed to happen, but it did. So I think that's all fine. This code with the canonical delta stuff is probably just a case of these things need to be set as V2S's, right? Like the move pattern just needs to be V2S. And these need to be set accordingly. The attack X and attack Y they're currently floating point values, which we don't really want them to be, right? Because the attacks have to be cardinal again. So we really want those to just be set as you would expect, so that we can use them as tile offsets on the grid. Is there no V2S? How is there not a V2S call? There's a V2U call. Very strange. Doesn't matter. So I'm not sure what this is complaining about at the immediate moment. I guess V2S's aren't allowed to multiply for some reason, which seems dumb. So we should fix that. Why can I not? It is hard to switch editors, I will say. I'm getting too old for this. I'm getting too old to do Handmade Hero. I can tell you that right now. So it looks like that's because we probably called this a Hadamard. Yeah, we did. I don't know why I used to do that. It's dumb. It's one of those like math, like pedantic things, but it's just dumb. I should have just implemented it regularly. But you know, live and learn, I guess. So yeah, we didn't call it. Oh, and that's also, sorry, that's also not Hadamard. I say that. I malign myself, which was deserved, but actually we just need the scalar version for this one. So anyway, math library nonsense notwithstanding, this is actually still able to be written like this because it's not a Hadamard product. It's just using the x and y and multiplying them by the two axes. So that's fine. Okay, so when we add a player, we do need to say where they should be, but it's just a tile index now. So it doesn't need anything more fancy. I don't really know what the p value here is for, because... Oh, because we did some packing stuff before. So again, the thing that I would like to do here, I think, is just only pack on tile indexes. This is why I say it's some pretty major changes. It's going to take me a while to get through them all. But we really don't need this anymore, right? Because if these things are always on tile indexes, then it doesn't actually need to do that, right? You can just say, look, all these things are on these tiles. And then you don't need to do the rest of it. And the glove, if it's, being placed differently, can just be offset if that's what needs to happen, right? And again, I don't really know how we want to do this because it's a little bit confusing to me, tile index-wise, for if we switch to doing it this way. If we look at something like the glove and we say, well, it's supposed to be on a particular tile index, is it going to be on a different tile index than the hero? Or is it always on the same tile index than the hero? I don't know. And so that is kind of a separate issue, right? And maybe we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Maybe we'll just get rid of that now and the glove will be in a weird position, but we'll, deal with that later. So if we change the body occupying thing here to just use the tile index thing below, then none of this stuff happens and we're okay. All right. This is a little bit weirder. We're probably still going to need a search for an empty space to add the player call. This is basically just something that loops over, it's not a real function because we don't know that we're actually going to support multiple players. We do right now, but we don't know that we're actually ever going to allow that in a real game. Because the game may not be designed to have multiple people in there jumping around. In fact, it probably won't be. So we don't really need this call, but we can do like we can still recover the get closest traversable thing, which would just look for the closest thing I can put somebody on that is, which tile doesn't have something on it right now. And that's it. So if I go to, assume we deleted that, yeah. So if you look at something like get closest entity with brain, this is kind of what we would be looking at. The same basic idea, so it would just be like, probably, I don't know. Probably like, get closest empty tile. And we might use this, to like, if we have to spawn something, you could imagine, this being a real function. at some point. So what this would do is it would just say hero tile index or something like that, and then we would say, well, get the closest empty tile to, you know, some sim region tile, and the sim region tile in our case, I don't know, here we go. The sim region tile in our case is should like this world position origin, you know, this is like origin tile index you would want here. And really, this now doesn't need to exist. So a world position can just be the origin tile index, and we can go from there. We don't need another thing, right? So we could say, well, the hero tile index is going to be something we're going to fill out. We call get closest empty tile to, and we say that we want the sim region's origin tile index because we don't really know what else we would ask for. It's just we're looking at this, you know, what's on the screen right now, try to find an unoccupied tile, and then it will fill in hero tile index with us if it finds one. It will fill in the hero tile index with that, and then we will add a player at that particular tile index specifically. Off we go. That seems fine, and probably actually looks like found tile index, looks like that, right? So we didn't implement a function that does that. We also need this tile space to sim region delta function, which is going to be a pretty standard function that we would do here. That looks, you know, something like this. Takes in a sim region, takes in a tile index, and then it just says, well, whatever the sim region origin tile index is, you know, we're going to again, I just question whether we even need this. As I'm saying it, I'm just like, well, if those p-values inside the, you know, inside the entity struct, if we just make those be offsets inside the tile, then we wouldn't, you know, we wouldn't need to do this. Like, it's easy enough to do, but we really don't actually need to do it. Because if you look, so there's like the update animation call, and if you look, like all of this nonsense is really just all you really would care about is the delta from one to the other tile-wise. So, like, you could just say, well, movement from is always just the tile you're on, which is 0, 0, 0, 0, right? And movement to is just whatever the delta is between the two tiles. So it's just this. Right. And again, this kind of, you know, it depends on how you were going to. So it depends on how you wanted to make the transactional occupy work. And so, you know, if you think about it, it's really the opposite of this based on the way we currently have it, where the transactional occupy happens at the end. So it would be literally just we take the tile difference here and we say that the movement from is actually like the backwards, where it's where we were. The missile knows where it is because it knows where it wasn't. So that should be fine. Get closest empty tile to may need to be put up front because this is V2S to V2S and, oh, whoops, I just typed it in wrong. I don't actually want a reference, I just want a pointer. Alright, so that seems fine. Traversable is open, is not a real thing. So we gotta kind of code that a little bit differently. Place entity at traversable. Again, we could just make all of this just go away, right? Like we don't actually need any of this. Transactional occupy does kind of need to be there, but not really, because that's not even checking the transactional occupy, so that wouldn't do anything anyway. So I think these just go away entirely. I think all of this stuff goes away. This, maybe not, because we're recording which entity was there, which presumably we use, but I don't even know if we need that anymore. Like this is why I said like most of this code can just be simplified away now. It's almost all unnecessary. So yeah, like you can kind of just see like these really don't, like these should be able to use the same stuff. You could, like the edit grid was just an attempt to impose the grid on top of things that didn't have a grid, and now we actually have one. So these should actually be things that we could do directly. So yeah, like I mean, so I think what I'm trying to say here is we should just move all this stuff into the sim region and have it just operate on the grid directly. Right? I mean, that's what we actually want. There are a few things that are a bit weird, which is like this kind of has the edit grid and it doesn't know, like you kind of want to pass in a radius or something, right? If you were going to use a generic grid, because you don't really want to, like you, if you got rid of the edit grid entirely, it wouldn't know what area you were talking about when you said find a random open tile. But the rest of this stuff shouldn't really have needed it, right? Because all of this stuff is just code to try and make it easier to deal with the fact that we didn't have a proper grid. So to me, that seems, like an obvious place to fix as well. It seems like we really just want something where you can just talk to the sim region and say, hey, tell me about the occupancy of these squares, what's on them, right? And so, like, these calls all feel like they really should just be in here, and this stuff should not have to use this, this, like, iterate as planar tiles and all this stuff. It just seems like we can collapse all this code down to be much less necessary. So that was a way to step through it as a, like, placing them around, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, so I think... I feel like the edit grid could also just now go away. You know what I mean? Like, looking at this, it's just like, yeah, we can pretty much just remove all of this code. None of it would need to happen anymore. Like, you need a couple of the, like, Z things in here. Vaguely. But only vaguely. So yeah, like, I just think this is it's just too complicated for no real reason, right? So I would say, like, this, you wouldn't really need an iterate as planar tiles here. You could just use a standard, loop over the X and Y. The begin grid edit would just be welded into the generate block call, which is just going to rasterize these things out, right? So I think, yeah, most of this stuff can just go away. The apron stuff we don't need anymore because we generate that automatically. We may want to keep some of this randomization code to, like, pick different, like, trees and stuff. So we probably want to keep that in a sense, right? We just don't want to have to use it as is. But we want to keep the code around because we'll probably put that in there for, our tree randomization or whatever. Right. So that will actually, I think, be good. So yeah, if you start to look at how this is going to break down, I think you would just say, like, hey, you're going to ask if a particular place is open, like tile is open, right, is what you're going to ask. And that's kind of just a way of saying, like, is it occupied, which we already have. Or plan to have, right? It's this. So we could say tile is open or tile is occupied, and those are the same call at that point. So you're really just doing a thing where you say, like, it's not tile is open. They're the same thing. In either case. And so this is actually if tile is open, not if tile is occupied. We don't need the not anymore. So here you can just ask the question directly, and then that's good. Find random open tile. This just needs to, like, we need a way of looping over, I guess, grid-like sections. Really, you would probably want to spiral outward. So you'd want to, like, start at the point they asked for or the randomized point, I guess you pick. And kind of look outward from there. So, it's not the best way to do this anyway. But we can cross that bridge when we come to it. Looking at find adjacent open tile. The Gen V3 thing, so that can all now collapse to V2S's as well, right? So there's no such thing as a Gen V3 anymore because we already now just have we don't need volumes for that anymore. So these can all be just V2S's because all the generator volumes are now just flat footprints, right? So we don't need that anymore, and all of this stuff can now just be like V2S. Pretty much period. God, this whole thing can be like reduced by like 10 or 20,000 lines of code. It's kind of nuts. So anyway, the box surface index now, stuff here that we had, we got rid of the other directions. So we also kind of know, yeah, that it can't, yeah, so all this is fine. If we delete Z from here, then these are really just rectangles, right? So this code we already have. It's this code, right? The only difference is this is the solid version, right? It's the version that's not floating point, so it's the one that's like discrete. So this can really be collapsed down too. All of this stuff very, very simple now to collapse down into smaller code, which is always what you want. Again, getting rid of the Z there. This like do we have a rectangle 2S? We don't. So we don't. Well, we do. We just called it something weird, right? So all this stuff is really just a rectangle 2. That's all a gen volume actually is. Why we call it a not 2I, I'm not sure. Because that's kind of weird, right? But if we look at the places where that exists, we've got all of these functions already in here. And I guess the one problem we might have is I don't know what our inclusion rule was for these, and maybe there's a problem with that. Like maybe there's a problem with the inclusion rule where we don't like is there a place where we test these things? I guess there really isn't. I mean, there is right here. So if this has area call works this way, then it's the same as the gen volume stuff, right? So really, I guess what I'm trying to say here is this code is all just completely redundant. We can get rid of literally the entire thing. It's all just completely garbage. Infinity volume is interesting. Does anyone actually use that anymore? We can port it over. Nobody uses it. Nobody uses inverted infinity volume apparently either. But either way. Okay, so we should now be able to say, well, out of these, right, like if we just take a look at what we've got here, out of these, which one of those, which ones of these actually need to be here, right? Like, which of these things are actually ever getting called? Just trying to figure that out, because we just port them to rectangle 2S and then call it a day. That just gets rid of, like, an entire file, right? Another way, I guess, to do this would just be who is using this and where. that's all in the math code. That's the edit grid thing that we're not using. Here's us passing one to this. So it's literally just for this piece of code right here. So I'm just making the command call here, right? So I'm saying we basically vaporize this, it's gone. So this, handmade genmath goes away. And then the genmath CPP, I'm going to go ahead and just grab those. I'm going to put them back in the handmade math thing below the rectangle 2i stuff. And then I'm just going to go through them and see if I want any of them still. And if I want them, then I'll keep them. And if I don't, I don't. So they're going to hang out there for a minute while we remove this. But otherwise, I'm just going to go back here and delete those. So I'm going to delete handmade gen math. So that and that are going away. All right. So now get these guys out of here. Temporarily, I'll leave this in. I don't like rectangle 2i, but oh well. And I'm just going to kind of go at it here for a little bit. These are literally just search and replace here. They're not, I don't even need to change the code. It looks like they're just renames, right? Same here. This code we'll get to in a minute. How long have we been going, by the way? Okay, we got a bit to go. Okay, so then handmade gen math here we want to get rid of as well. Okay. So then if we look at some of this garbage, this is the edit grid code, and I just want to figure out if there anything in here we actually need. And so again, because we now don't have to do all this changing of space, and it's just the V2S that says what position you're on, in theory, all of this stuff would go away, because now we would just be using V2Ss and we don't need world positions anymore, right? So I think what we kind of want is to just vaporize most of this as well. Yeah, I mean, I think most of this stuff can just be deleted. I don't know that we really need any of this. So let's find out what happens when we do that. So let's suppose that we just don't want to do any of these things at all, because they're stupid. And I guess the edit tile part of things is maybe something we could keep temporarily, like if we said that it had the region in it, and so like we kind of get rid of this, and we just use the sim region as this, right? But when you look at like what's happening, I'm not sure. I suppose the world generator is probably what you would want here, so that you're just passing that around instead. Because it already has all this stuff. It has, like, it would have the random series as well, right? Although it doesn't seem to. I guess it just has entropy here. But let's take a look at what happens if we do that. So all of this stuff would go away. We wouldn't need, I don't think, any of it. The same would be true of these tile access functions. And all of this stuff, and the begin grid edit, that does sort of need to be there, but it's actually just this begin world change function that we would call. And the temporary memory, I guess, I don't know if anyone actually uses. They don't seem to. So really when we do generate block here, what we're really doing is saying, hey, this has to do its begin temporary memory, and then at the end we have to do the end call of that for the sim region, right? So this thing is going to do the begin world change part of things like that. So we would just say, all right, we start a world change here using all of this garbage. Same thing as you would expect, right? Nothing particularly interesting there. And the change rect that we're passing in now, again, for these world changes is going to be based on tiles. So we know we're only iterating over the particular tiles that are in this rectangle. I don't know, block area or something like that, right? So when we do a begin world change, you can see when it, you know, it's got these like sim bounds and apron bounds, those sorts of things. In our case, they would both just be this block area, because we don't touch stuff that's outside of it, right? At least at the moment. Maybe we will eventually, I'm not sure. I think that all makes rough sense. But again, in the future, like, so this origin thing doesn't need to be here anymore. So like the way this will actually work is begin world change is just going to take two of these rectangles, right? I mean, what I guess it needs a tile origin. Or an origin tile index, I guess I should say. I guess it needs that, but I'm not sure exactly why, because I'm not sure why you care what the origin tile index is if you already have the bounds. And I'm just trying to think why you would care about that. There were some weird things with the way we were doing, like, lighting and stuff. So I'm reticent to, like, delete that just yet. So I'll leave it temporarily, right? But then we'll deal with it. We'll deal with that later. So we're going to be doing something like that. And so we don't really care what this center point is. So it you know, we'll just call it the center of the region that we're changing. And then I think that's it. So we have the temp mem here, and we have the sim region. But now that's all we really needed to do, and we don't need to do this anymore. So that would just walk us through the tiles, as it were, and this can be simplified now completely to just use that tile index as is. So again, just it gets rid of a massive amount of code, potentially. So this is just from the mismatch of not deciding to just be tile-based explicitly at the outset. So we were kind of having to constantly do all this work to shuffle between them, and if we just don't, then we don't have to do any of it, right? So I think we just get rid of all of this and all of this. IsOnEdge is a function we probably want for rectangles in general. So meaning that wants to be in the math side of things. So, you know, when we're into here, we want to be able to ask, like, hey, is a particular V2S on the edge of a rectangle, yes or no, you know? And that's not particularly difficult, obviously. All we're talking about here is the tile index x being equal to the rect min x. Tile index x being equal to the rect max x minus 1. And then the same with y. So that's just going to test for any rectangle. So now you don't have to specifically have an edit grid or something. You can just ask if a thing is on the edge of any rectangle, and that will, you know, again, it's just reusing code that we already have, which is why I like that, because it's like now we don't need a special thing to make all that work, right? It does its own, it makes its own sauce, if you will, which is what you're going for. So then, like, all right, I don't know what any of this would be necessary for. A couple of these things are just getting like heights of stuff. So I mean, this is still a useful utility function for figuring out how big something is supposed to be. So I don't necessarily know that we don't do it. We probably still want these functions in there. They just wouldn't have an x and y coordinate. Other than they would all be centered around 0, 0. So yeah, how much time? What am I doing here? 18. I go for a little longer. So yeah, this probably wants a way to say what the tile volume is. So when we're doing the actual generation, in here, this thing should know that, right? It should have a way of knowing like what the actual volume of a tile is. And I don't know where that would go, but probably not in here. But, you know, you would want some way to say, hey, for this tile index, give me back the rectangle 3 that it should be. But, of course, I guess, you know, if we said get tile volume, we wouldn't really need this because all the other things are relative to the position of the thing, tile index-wise. Or at least that's how it should go. So really, you can just pass a void here, and this would give you back rote information. This can always just be 0. Right? And you can just say, well, whatever the dimensions of the tile, whatever are the dimensions of a tile, the min p is just negative that, and the max p is just the tile dim plus that, right? So it's literally always this. So you just need to know like what that tile dim actually is, and then you can always have this. The world generator should know that, and it would come from the world structure itself, but you can see it right there. So it's really just this. So, I mean that's it. In fact, we don't even need to do it. There's already a call. It's literally just this. If you assume centered tiling, right? I mean, it's the dumbest possible thing. So again, just getting rid of a ton of code here. Just a ton of code going away. Back to the edit grid stuff. So, these can stay, I guess. I mean, I don't see a lot of reason to nerf them, because if you look at what they do, they pretty much just operate off that call we just ported. So I think that just works, right? We don't need to get rid of them. So I think we're good there. And then finally, I guess I would say, like, so this stuff, I don't know, maybe we just vaporize this as well, and we just say this is 2 for-i loops here. So, there's going to be a y loop where we do y equals block area min y, or whatever it's called. Y is less than block area max y plus y, and then x equals block area min x, x less than block area max x plus x. And then this just loops over this. This just gives us the tile index directly, right? It's just going to be those coordinates. There is no abs or relative or any of that stuff. It's just the tile index. And off you go. Like so. So that way we get rid of another file completely. This entire file goes away. Nobody cares about it, and it doesn't need to be there. But Microsoft C++ compiler driver has a real problem with that, apparently. Speaking of code bases where nobody cleans anything up, here we go. So that's over. That was good. But, I mean, I didn't really need it to work right now, I suppose. So there's the edit grid code, which has now been deleted. Goodbye. And let's get it out of the code base entirely. Edit grid. So it's gone now. Yay. What are you doing, Microsoft? Do you know how to compile a file? What is your problem? I'm not going to debug Visual Studio with Visual Studio. All right, so, that happened. So the edit grid thing, we don't really want to do anymore. So we kind of want to more pass the world generator here, probably, or something. All right, so basically we can't even compile anymore because Microsoft has decided that that's just not feasible. Like, they don't know how they would compile a program. So it looks like the error is an internal compiler error in this. Well, that doesn't tell me that. That's just the executable. So that doesn't actually tell me anything about what the actual error was. In entitygen.h12.9 was the last thing we can actually see. I don't know. I don't know that gives us much real insight into what we would do to fix the bug. In the compiler, what comes after that? worldgen.h. So, I don't know, do we use anything in worldgen.h? Like, is the edit grid implicated in here anywhere? It's not. roomgen.h. Is the edit grid in here? Because all we did was get rid of the edit grid, right? I mean, that's all I did. I didn't think I did anything particularly confusing. So, well, that's a bit of a bummer. So I'm going to probably have to do some troubleshooting even to get us to the point where we compile. I guess I'll just try fixing these bugs, but that's not going to help. And then I guess I'll put in messaging to try and figure out where it's actually crashing directly. So, it could just be the fact that world generator is not declared in that, and that would be great, but it's probably unlikely. So if I said struct world generator here, right, and I build, I'm assuming that doesn't get me out of the woods. It does. All right. That's all we needed. So just the fact that it didn't know what that was enough. In the type def, it was like, we're going down. There's an undeclared struct. I don't know what to do now, though. Like, Microsoft's compiler is terrible nowadays, it's true. But so is Clang. Like, Clang is absolute garbage now. I mean, it is so slow. I mean, it's insane how slow the Clang compiler is now. So I don't even know what you're supposed to do to build C programs on Windows anymore. I mean, Clang is so slow that it's like, I've seen the code base, I guess. If you go look at the code base for Clang, you can see why it's slow. It's absolute. I mean, it's just a complete mess. I think some of these things in Handmade Hero are stringy because, we haven't maintained them because it's hard to do on stream. But, like, geez, you go to the LVM code base, it's insane how much unnecessary code there is. It's like 99% code that doesn't do anything and like one little tiny percent piece of code that does something. So, yeah, I mean, it's almost unusable, Clang. You kind of just have to use it as a final compile sometimes if you want to, but I had switched away from MSVC and was using Clang on Windows fairly often, but then I updated it at one point and it was so much slower that I now don't use it anymore except occasionally to test. So I back on Microsoft Visual Studio because Clang got so bad. What is circle lang? I don't think I've ever heard of that one. Oh, a new C++ compiler. Yeah, C++ itself is a total mess. That is true. Unfortunately, C stubbornly refuses to add operator overloading, so it's pretty rough. I would like to be able to switch to C, but there's a few things, operator overloading being a major one of them, that's hard to do without. But anyway. Okay, so let's take a look at the energy gen thing here. I don't think I care about any of this stuff. At all. I'm pretty sure we literally don't care about any of this stuff at all. So all this stuff, like place entity on traversable, like all this garbage is just not, like none of this is anything. So I think we pretty much just want to do, you know, something like this. In fact, we already have the, yeah, so, you know, maybe like on tile, and we just do that or something. I mean, I probably should return a struct for these. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Have I already discussed Carbon and Go? Yes, I have. And I don't care about them at all. So the add entity grid region, that's really just the sim region. So if we look at the world generator, we probably, I mean, I don't know, maybe we want another type for this, but I don't think we really do. It doesn't make sense. There's no point, and we're probably not going to multi-thread it. Maybe we will at some point, but if we did, we probably need multiple world generators because they'd have multiple series as well. Why is this not coming up? Where the heck is the thing? Like, how hard is it just to show me the frickin' type? I swear nothing works anymore. Okay, there we go. So the world generator, in this case, can just have the sim region in it. I think that's fine. Like whichever the currently open sim region is. So we would just say it'd be like this kind of thing. That seems fine to me. You know. And again, I'm not 100% sure about this stuff. I'm just sort of going by intuition here. I'm saying, like, look, let's simplify this down. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to simplify down, but maybe it works something, you know, like this. what was that called? Seg tile? All right. Not bad in a pinch, you know, not fabulous, but okay. This seems fine, except this is a V2S, not a V3S now. In fact, V3S probably doesn't need to exist anymore. Well, it might for the lighting. The lighting is still kind of 3D, and sort of wants to be. Maybe in the future we even make that 2D, I don't know. But, hard to say, right? Alright, so that's fine. That seems fine too. Grid undeclared identifier? There is no... Grid does not occur on that line. Did this not save my file or something? Probably one of those misattributed error things that this program seems to do, where it puts an error on a line where that is not that error, right? Like, that is not the error even a little bit. Like, the error is find random open tile identifier not found, right? But it just puts something else on there. I don't know why. That is a mystery for the people who maintain forcoder to ask themselves. Syntax error missing semicolon before identifier find random open tile. Again, not actually happening here. So it's the head tile is the undeclared identifier. So it's on tile or head tile index would be the other way to do that. Okay. So what is this code complaining about? It's that it can't convert a random series to random series star. Okay, so that's actually not an at, and that's fine. Then here we have an attempt where we're picking tiles by just, so this really is just a V2S now, and this would be also a V2S, I guess. Yeah. I don't know what else this is doing. What else is this doing? Nothing really. So I think this is just, you know, it's just garbage. You don't have to do any of these things. We can just get it down to this. Oops. Which is fine. And I guess I don't know what this is claiming about, because of course the errors are all wrong, so so I'm not sure what the errors actually are, but we'll get to them eventually. The find random open tile part here, I guess you can see why. This kind of gives me some pause. So I do think, you know, maybe we want like in the sim region code where we have the find you know, random open tile, whatever. I think we kind of want to go like, okay, so, you know, these guys should probably return something compound called, like, you know, a tile result or something, and it's like, here's the index of the tile and here's whether it was valid or something, right? So that way you can just ask, like, you know, get closest empty tile to, and it will return you a tile result that has both things bundled. That's what I was leaning towards originally, and I didn't do it, and I'm just like, nah, you should do it. Because you can see why you want it. You want to be able to store whether it worked or not, and the index together. So I think that's what you want in general. So here is the tile result. In this case, and it's going to be a sim region. We've got a little bit of work to do to actually port that one, but that's how it would work. Same here. And so on. So those would all take tile results. I don't really want to debug these right now, but that's just not in the mix for us, unfortunately. So now we're back to this. So we would say tile results on tile equals find random open tile, like that. And then we would say if on tile valid, right? And that looks better to me. Like, I like that. So find random open tile. We pass a sim region to. And these things are all stupid, and we will probably get rid of them. But I'm just porting them now, so I make sure that everything works properly. The onTile.valid is complaining for some reason, but I'm not sure what the reason actually is. Oh, because there's no semicolon. That's what it is. It's like this is Casey's has to guess the error. Right. All right, same thing here. So just kind of the other way was better. I think I just like it better, so it's going to stay that way. No big deal. I just like that better. I think that's more what it should be. And oops, that's supposed to be valid. Like so. And this will be the same here. We make the exact same change. This should have the sim region being passed to it, and this will check if it's valid, and this will use its index, and all that good stuff, right? That is now a tile result, not a straight index. And prev tile. That seems so. Find adjacent. Open tile takes the sim region, the previous tile, and the direction mask, and returns a tile result. That looks right. So I don't actually know what that's complaining about. So that's just a plus equals operator not existing for that thing. But what was the problem here? Find adjacent open tile identifier not found. So is it just a case that this needed to be promoted out? How did it find this one, but not this one? I guess it's just because it thinks this is a syntax error here, so it's like, oh, we didn't know this was an actual function definition, right? Or something like that. Let's just fix that for now so that we don't have this kind of cascading failure state. So, there. Better. All right. So that looks pretty good now. So that's all good. I don't have any problem with that now. I'm just going to nerf these and put a not implemented next to them, because that way we can compile and actually fix the errors directly, and maybe the errors will actually line up better. Maybe. So yeah, we need an operator plus equals for our V2S's. So basically these guys need that. Now why I wrote it like that, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. Here, tile at now needs to be like a tile result. And I guess the idea is that here we say the tile result is going to be valid true, and index is that, and we still need this part of it, right? Then we can check its validity later when we do the find random open tile, which we would need to pass the sim region to. And then we can ask if the tile is open. And tile already exists, I guess, is implemented as part of this like little list of tiles thing. But otherwise I think we're good. The sim region has to be passed here, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to figure that out. And then I think we're good. The tile already exists. Again, just needs that to work. And then the append tile, same. It's not rel index, it's just index, right? So this is just a query because it's trying to find what's on that. I guess it's trying to find what's on that tile, right? And so again, it just to me feels like sort of a little bit of putting the cart before the horse. You know, if you actually want this to operate this way, you would just say, oh, are there switches here? Generate the index list, and then when you actually do the generate block function, so in here, just test and see, right? So like this whole thing is kind of dumb in a way, because what I would argue you want to do here is you would use this to say, okay, generate me the switch pattern that I actually need to use, and then we'll just create that on the fly as necessary, right? So I'm going to if-zero this out for now, but I'm just going to say, like, that's obviously what you would do when when we actually go to generate a block. You would just directly do it. You don't need to place it after the fact, right? You just generate the pattern, and then when you're rasterizing, you do it. And that just seems... So, you know, a lot of this just seems kind of a dumb... It's just a dumb... It seems like a dumb way to do it. It's a scatter rather than gather approach, but there's no real reason for that as far as I can tell. I assume the talk tile it's actually this. We pass the index of the previous one, right? And then we make sure both of them are valid. We add an entity. We do some nonsense. We put the entity on the care tile. We put the conversation on the talk tile, like so. And yeah. We have a do this next weekend to do, but we definitely didn't do it. Right? So, I mean, right now, it's, I don't know, like, we didn't do that. So right now, let's just say we never did compute this. So, oh well. You know, life goes on. These are both actually not 3D anyway. And again, these are things that we can just use when we actually do the block itself. We can just see if we're on one of these squares and then put it in. So the scatter, I really don't like the scatter idea very much. I don't think it's very good. But, you know, oh well. So we'll deal with all these later. Again, this is a pretty major change, so we're going to have to do more than just incremental stuff, I'm afraid. I don't think we use room specs anymore. They're not really a thing that we use that I know of. So I think we can probably just get rid of them again entirely because they don't need to exist. But yeah, I mean, for the moment, I guess I'll just say, well, you can fine, leave it, you know. Leave it in, but eventually it should probably just get removed because I don't think it does anything. Gen rooms also, I don't think, do anything. None of this code, we don't run it, we don't use any of this anymore. Like, all of this is not something we're doing anymore. Right? Like, we literally got rid of all of this stuff. As far as I know, this is all just gone now. Right? Like, it's all gone. Like, all of it. So none of that has to be ported because we don't do any of that anymore. This stuff here where we rasterize the blocks, again, I think that is all now just out the world bounds. The world bound should now probably be in terms of tiles. For sure. Right, but yeah, and this, you know, it would be better if this were as a V2S that was just min and max, you know? I don't know why it's written this way. It's a bit strange, right? Like, this should be that. should just be a v2s, and this should just be a v2s. But we probably didn't have those at the time. I'm guessing. I don't really know. It'd be cool to do a thing that says, like, only change this thing in an error. You know? So you could do search and replace on things like this, but you wouldn't accidentally replace things that weren't errors. Because you know that, like, there's plenty of things that have the same pattern or something. It's just kind of like a weak version of the, like, actual semantic code editing. You know? Maybe I should do this with search and replace. Because most of it is that way. Let's try it. Max x max dot x. And min x. All right. Very slow going. These are the kinds of things that, you know, should be really easy by now in code editing, but they're not because the tools are, you know, very far behind where they should be. But, like, it shouldn't even be a question that this would be a no-effort change. Like, the fact that you actually have to look through the code at all is just ridiculous. Like, it should just be like, oh, yeah, that member is just changed to being accessed this way. Like, why am I doing any work for that? Right? But editors still don't really know very much about code. Unlike literally everything else in the whole world. Like, you know, a 3D graphics program, it would be absurd to imagine a 3D graphics program that didn't know it was editing a mesh. But that's where we're at with code. That's just that's the normal expected case with code, is that the editor has no idea what it's looking at. And that, like, if you want it to know something about what it's looking at, it's like a plugin, right? It's like, I bought this plugin so that my editor would have some idea what the heck it was actually doing. You know what I mean? Which is kind of hilarious. Like, it's just like, God, that's so ridiculous when you think about, you know, when you think about the implications of that. You know, no one would ever do that in any other domain, but code, par for the course, right? So block x block y with multiply plus min tile I dot x plus min tile. I don't know if there's anything wrong with it. I think it's all just right now. I think it's all just fine. So that code can just What I think about Rust, I think it's a dumb language that people get excited about because, you know, they think that like getting compile time checking for things that were bad ideas in 1995 that we are still using today for some reason is good, but it's not. You just shouldn't be doing those things. So, like, if you find that that Rust helps you with something, it probably means that you wrote the code in a way that was a bad design in the first place. But if you're hell bent on designing your code that way, then Rust is probably fine because, hey, then you can get some actual compile time checking for things like 8,000 billion pointer allocations all over your code. All right, so this looks fine. And again, this is just changing types a little bit here. We're gonna get to those changes in a second. There's no Z anymore on any of this stuff, so that's just gonna be 0, right? There's no Z. And probably that initial camera P thing will go away at some point. That would be my assumption. So the V2S for the dim here is just, there's no Z. So that's all that's going on there. This is just taking the world generator, not an actual tile, and then I think this code is now also fine. Yes. Right? No? What is the problem? I don't quite see what the problem is there. Let's try to actually get to it so we can see what the error is. Oh, because it's get tile volume now. That's why I renamed it. Yeah. Okay. That might be it for today. Because that's 2 hours in, and I don't want to go for too long. But we're getting there slowly but surely. It will take a while to change this much stuff. But again, like I said, it's mostly getting rid of code, and then patching up the results, which is fine. The make relative thing also wouldn't need to happen anymore, right? So that's just not a problem. And I guess this is just looking at the tile locations of these things, which we want to be able to do, but I don't actually know how we're storing the A locations of these guys. So we're going to have to look at that at some point. So I don't want to modify these today. I think we want to round, that code off, but it doesn't matter. So anyway, I think we're not in that bad a shape. It's just going to take a lot of elbow grease here to finish this stuff off and then repair, all of the assumptions that we have. You know what I mean? Because there's just a lot of stuff that we broke now that's downstream of, changing to tile indexes, right? All right. This is going to be sim region and also gen sim region equals sim region here. We should also clear it down here, and then I think we're good. And there's a couple of things we're probably going to want to do, but, you know, it's all right for now. All right. I'm going to call it there. And then next weekend we'll re-pick that up and try to do some more, probably just like finish up some of that stuff and try to do some more like deleting of code to get us down to, again, just like tile indexes being primary in most places. And then we'll go from there. All right. Thanks everyone for joining me. I will see you next weekend for that. Until then, have fun programming, and I'll see you on the internet.